So welcome, everybody. We are talking about feasibility studies tonight. I'm April Williams. I'm head of marketing with Backyard ADUs. All the social media that you see and the newsletters you receive, those are coming from my computer. And then with us tonight, we have Jeff Bowman. He's our small home advisor in in Maine, sorry. So if you live in Maine, you'll be working alongside Jeff if you choose to build with us or if you have questions for him. And then we have Tim O'Reilly. He's from Massachusetts, our Massachusetts small home advisor. So if that's the region that you're in, you will be working alongside Tim. Is there anything I'm missing? Again, reminder, the chat is closed just to simplify our ability to be able to answer your questions. But if you do have a question, you can submit it with that Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen. Throughout the night, Jeff and Tim may be mentioning certain resources or reference certain items or photos. And instead of trying to frantically find them and get them to you, I'm going to compile a list. And so you'll receive an email tomorrow with all of those resources that are mentioned. So don't worry about trying to find them right now on the fly. I'll send all those links to you. Did I miss anything?
That's it. Let's get started.
All right, let's go.
So the more questions, the merrier. Jeff and I have a lot to cover tonight, but these events are really made lively by your questions. So don't hesitate to use that Q&A box. Well, let's get started. So feasibilities have been around for a while here at Backyard ADUs. They started off as sort of a bootleg ad hoc process. People would call us or email us and we'd come out, we'd look at their property. And it's come a long way since then. So we'll go over tonight sort of all that we've learned, how we approach these reports, and what they provide you. So what is it? We'll talk about our 3-step process. What are the deliverables at the end? And basically, how do you wrap your head around getting started on an ADU project? So this is a project that Jeff worked on. The project started off looking like this. They got someone out to the site. They cleared it out. In this case, it wasn't an ADU, it was a single family home, but we went through our same rigorous process to get them good information up front, accurate information on pricing, and that gave them the confidence to say, we're ready to do this for our family. And so they, turn something like this, whether it's raw land or a backyard, into an ADU, into a home for someone that you care about or for yourself. So that's our goal, is to get people the information to end up happy and in a home. So where does construction get it wrong? In those early days of feasibilities and talking with homeowners, we saw a lot of information of what's going on out there in the construction space, and the types of information and things that go wrong. So this was a particular quote that a homeowner got for building their house. And I honestly, I still don't know. You can see all the numbers on here, whether they were quoted 300 million or 300,000 and what all these different pieces were. But when I got this estimate, they said, hey, this is what someone else has told us is possible and what it costs. I was confused, probably equally as confused as you guys are looking at this. So we were learning out there in the marketplace. There's a lot of hand waving. There's a lot of information that's lacking details. There's too many unknowns when you approach a construction project. There's so many pieces that go into making that happen, that it's hard to really track down and understand line by line all those moving parts. And there's also many different opinions. If you ask 3 site work people to look at one site, you're probably going to get 3 different answers. And that's maybe the same for an electrician, for a plumber, and from builders, architects, surveyors. So our goal overall here is to correct some of these wrongs, to have our team come out and do a site visit, our engineering team reviews it, our design team reviews it, and we lean on our experience of building close to 50 homes at this point, to get you a report with detailed information that you can use to go out there with confidence and figure out if an ADU or a small home build is right for you.
Yeah, it's not only that, but it's catered to each individual parcel of land. So where it is that you're looking to build, what it is you're looking to do, we cater these things to you. So
exactly. And that's what's hard is you can know that ADUs are possible in your town, but that's missing the construction piece for your specific lot, for your infrastructure and your constraints of where you are and where you want that project to be. So that's our goal here, is to get you that quality information up front so you can make informed decisions. We tell Jeff and I say this all the time. Don't you're spending $600 on a feasibility study. It's not binding. Our goal is that unbiased information, so you can take that to any construction professional and be informed about your property and have the path forward. And it really does help you identify next steps. So, like I said, so many different moving parts, so many different professionals involved in the construction project, but you'll be armed with the information to know how do I move forward? Maybe what are some unknowns I still need to tackle? And you could basically, move forward with that intel. Jeff, you were saying you just had someone come back from July. They had their feasibility done in July, and now they're ready.
Yep.
That's another thing we're hoping to offer here is you get us on site, you get our team to review it. But whether you're ready to move right now in 6 months or in 24 months, that feasibility doesn't really expire as long as the utilities and infrastructure and things remain the same. And the goal there as well, we know the elephant in the room is always cost. So it's not just the cost of a house, it's the cost of a house hooked up with pathways, with everything you need to move right in. And then that can help you identify upfront financing strategies, so that way you can move forward with confidence. And then Jeff and I are always here for questions. So what we like to do is basically have that open forum, get your questions answered, look at the report together, and go from there. So Jeff, talking about pricing, what are we trying to identify with that feasibility?
Yep. So with the feasibility study, we are coming out to your parcel of land, whether that's raw land or if you're trying to build an ADU, land that's already been built upon with your single family residence. And we're trying to analyze what the total project cost is going to be. So there's a lot of facets to that. You have the cost of the ADU or the single family home that we're building for you. Those are relatively, they do move around, but we have some good information. We've been building these for a long time. We can really dial in what a cost of a house is going to be. So that's not as variable as some of the other items can be. One thing to touch on is that we do quite a bit of vertical integration in the company. So we not only help you design the home, do the feasibility study, but we also are our own general contractor and have our own team of carpenters and subcontractors that we work reliably with. So we're able to give you a total project cost for the building of an ADU with pretty clear eyes of what it would cost to build in your municipality or where you're at, which is just an advantage for you. So with that, we know when we do this feasibility study, we look at not only the cost of the home, but then also what the site conditions are. So what we're going to need to do for driveways, site clearing, utility connections. And we also work with, at least in Maine, we work with a pretty small group of subcontractors that we know what their scope is. We know how they price things. We know we have a good relationship with these folks. So we can not only we can give you some pretty accurate quoting on what the project scope would be. So there's the foundation, there's the site prep, and then given each municipality and what's going to be happening on that side of things, on the permitting. There's certain municipalities, again, my reference point is here in Maine. There's some municipalities that are easier to build in, and there are some that maybe are more expensive or timely or costly, that we can give you guidance and let you know that, hey, this is going to be an easier road or a harder road, but either way, we're there with you the entire way. through the process.
And we'll look at some of these tonight. We want to dive into these, peel back sort of the layers, because again, getting accurate information for your property, these percentage or proportions might vary a bit. We're doing a lot of work down on Cape Cod. So in that case, when we're thinking about utilities, it's often a septic. And hey, that's going to cost a little bit more than maybe if we're in an in-town lot and town sewer. Likewise, some towns require a bit more planning and permitting. So that's more time consuming. They need additional documentation. That might be a little bit more expensive there. You might be out in the sticks a bit. So you have to do a little bit more site prep and landscaping. But all those pieces can vary. But generally speaking, we need to get our eyes on site so that we can hone in and get better information there. So earlier on that slide, we said this is a 3-part process. So the 3 parts of that feasibility, the first is before we even come out to the site. And that involves a lot of background research with our civil team and working with your small home advisor. So Jeff and I do this all the time, is we hear about people's goals and visions, hear about their budget, what are they hoping to accomplish? And that helps us steer the conversation to start to figure out all these unknowns. So Jeff and I will go back in and look at your specific address to then figure out your zoning district and figure out the exact rules for your property, governing setbacks, lot size, lot coverage. I could go on and on, but there's a lot of rules specific to your zoning district that we want to find out to be able to give you good information. We're then going to go and do a GIS map review. Every municipality, I pulled up on the bottom here a couple different brokers for those GIS maps. But we'd want to search your town and whatever GIS platform that they use. We're going to go in there and see what kind of data is out there on your property. That's going to include any overlay districts or any other relevant zoning or special wildlife corridors or floodplains or anything like that we would want to know and wrap our heads around before coming out to do a site visit. And then we go and see if the town had any more specific documentation about your property. So if you're on a septic, what are the records on file? If you have a well, are there any records on file? And then maybe any other information that town might have. That arms us with your goals and all the information that we can gather from a computer to prepare us to come on site, put on our construction hat, and gather that intel on how to make that project work. As we're looking at bylaws, towns look at ADUs a little bit differently. All rules, although except in Maine, with LD 2003, there's a little bit more of a level playing field of ADUs being by right on this category on the left here, of saying, hey, if you design your project, meet all the relevant building and zoning requirements, by right, you could get a building permit. Some towns with more antiquated rules will require a special permit, or we need to do a public hearing. Your neighbors will be informed and can show up, although it is often a rubber stamping. So we want to download this information and prepare you up front. How is it possible to get that ADU permitted? What effects might it have on timing of the project? What effects might it have on pricing? And then what you might expect just in terms of that process, where we've done a couple where, the neighbors get informed and people aren't too happy that an ADU is being built. But there's also stories of the opposite where, you tell your neighbors, they understand, your family's consolidating or you need a place for a loved one. And an ADU is what makes sense. So permitting routes do vary, but that's something we're going to try to wrap our heads around to set good expectations up front of how to make a project happen.
I would say in Maine, it should be as LD 2003 is getting supposed to be going to effect July of this year. It was supposed to go into July of last year, but it got pushed out a year. By right, they should be allowed. However, I am finding there are certain municipalities that are refusing to update their zoning code. So there is, and with the state law, there are some very broad terminology in the state rules to allow each municipality to govern as they see fit. So without getting into the weeds of it, a municipality can make it as easy or as hard as they want to allow ADUs. So during the feasibility study, we will do a deep dive into what is your specific circumstance and let you know that information and let you know what we think about that and what we know about that. So it's very informative.
Yeah,
We do have
actually. Oh, go ahead, April.
We have a few questions. A lot of them we're going to be covering later, I know. So if I don't read your question, it's just because we're going to be talking about it soon. But in relation to permitting, someone asked, is there a footprint size restriction for ADUs in Maine?
So that's going to vary from municipality to municipality. In general, 800 square feet is a estimate. I see some municipalities that have 600 square feet. I see some that have 1,000 square feet. I see some that have no strict adherence. I have some that require a certain percentage of the main house. It really does depend on where you live. You can feel free to reach out to me directly with your circumstance. We'll share my contact information here shortly, I think.
Yeah, and another one was, can you tell, given the expense, can you tell from a site map if there's enough land? Just from the site map alone.
That's a good question. So that would be part of our initial review here of looking at your town, your zoning district, and your lot, and looking at those rules to see, are there anything in these rules that might relate to lot size? So that may come up at that initial zoning review. So it's another response where it does really, it's nuanced. Where are you? And what is your lot? Is it pre-existing non-conforming or is it conforming? We'd want to look and see where you are and all those details.
What your setbacks are, there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
And since the last question said, given the expense, another question is, how much does the feasibility cost?
Yeah. So the feasibility is $600, and that basically covers our time to come out and do the site visit, compile the report, and then have our engineering and design team review it. So,
yeah. And we'll go over what all is involved in that too, and what you get out of that. And then a great question that I was going to chime in, so I'm glad someone asked it, is could you explain what LD 2003 is?
Yep. That's a state law, so governing the entire state of Maine. It is a state law allowing, so it is multifaceted, but in terms of ADUs, it allows the right for ADUs in any residential district by right. So every municipality historically has had their own iterations and their own viewpoints of how they accept ADUs or don't accept ADUs. And this new state law is going to make sure that every municipality has to allow ADUs by right. With that, municipalities are interpreting that, and it was left open, talking to the state legislators who wrote the bill, it was left open for municipalities to take that and be as open or as hard as they want to be about that. In general, in Maine, municipalities are being adaptive to the bill, and they are changing any kind of legislation or zoning ordinances in their own municipality to be in accordance with the higher state. So there are a few exceptions, but in general, Maine is if you live in a residential district, which you most likely do, you should be able to build an ADU in your property.
And for those of you in Massachusetts,
I'll include more information on that as well in that resource email tomorrow.
Yeah, and for those of you in Massachusetts, there is a bill that's currently proposed to do something similar in Massachusetts to basically make ADUs by right, and then the towns would go in and add any specific rules that they want. But it would be similar leveling of the playing field, So instead of 350 some odd towns having 350 some odd sets of rules, there would be a standard base set of rules to work from. But within that, something that we need to identify up front is to see if there's any additional permitting that might be needed. So we're doing a lot of work on Cape Cod. And this was an overlay district or a few overlay districts that we encountered when we were looking at someone's property. So they were dealing with, off the top of my head, I can't remember if this was the coastal ponds overlay and the wildlife corridors and the wellhead protection districts. But it was important to know where exactly is your property here in Falmouth, because there might be some additional permitting we need to do and some additional rules that we need to follow. And that they often pertain to septic, sometimes to wells, but oftentimes as well to open space and things like that. So we need to wrap our heads around as much as we can before we come out. That way, when we're on site and assessing your property, we have all this information downloaded so we can get you good, accurate information. So the site visit. So part 2 here is actually coming out to site. Jeff or myself will bring a car full of tools. We'll have the transit, a laser transit to shoot any grade differential. We're thinking in the back of our heads, what do we need to do for foundation work? Is it a flat lot? Is there a grade drop? Do we need to add more foundation material to make sure we have a nice level home? Along that vein, if you're on a septic, we're thinking about gravity and gravity feeding our waistline. That's also true for town sewer. And trying to identify where are these pieces. So Jeff, these are photos from one that you did. You remember what you were aiming to capture here on site?
Yep, I do. So this is a lot in South Portland. I was hoping to showcase how close we are to the property setback lines and the neighbor's property. They built the house right on the property line. What we're doing during this site visit is we're taking note of any existing structures or natural features. So that whether that be ledge or trees or other natural factors to be involved with costing and the total project scope, as well as this one they were thinking about doing an attachment. So what that attachment detail might be to the existing house. Some municipalities allow attached or detached. In Maine, after LD 2003 goes through, you should be allowed to do either. And this one was a relatively flat piece of land. So it was in a neighborhood, as you can see, and just nice flat parcel. They did want to remove the tree and maybe move the shed. But these were just some rough photos I took of for internal purposes, and here they are out on the web. But these were just for verifying that I'm taking my measurements and what those were and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I see too, it's where's parking? Where's the street? So it's not only where can we fit the house, we're going to look at utilities in a minute, but once this house is built, how are you going to access it? How is it going to function in relation to the main house, in relation to the street? And making sure, looking from our construction lens, that it's all going to make sense.
When municipalities, do municipalities allow prefab ADUs? Does it make a difference if they're stick built or prefab?
That's a great question. So the short answer is no. For example, we're mostly a modular builder. So we use volumetric modular boxes, or sometimes known as prefab. Sometimes we're doing stick built work as well, whether that's a connection or a mudroom or a garage. But whether it's stick built or modular, as long as it meets all the requirements for a building permit, it should be allowed. And part of those requirements to meet a building permit is how are you getting this thing hooked up? Water, sewer, electrical. Jeff and I are always looking out for this to see how it's going to work. So I alluded to it earlier, sewer and septic, we're thinking about that grade differential. Can we gravity feed from the new structure to whatever infrastructure is there? If you're on a septic, what's your capacity? That's both of the tank and the leaching field. How old is that system? We're doing brand new construction here. We don't want to be hooking up to something and you're going to have problems down the road if it can't handle that new construction bit. And then especially in coastal areas where there's sensitive ecosystems, we see a lot of that on Cape Cod. Are there any requirements for nitrogen reduction? We could have a whole series on this, and there are some great resources out there. So if this is something you're interested in, let me know.
There are questions pertaining to this, so.
Yeah, I would recommend at the end of the webinar, here's my email. Shoot me an email. Actually, I just listened to a great interview today with the head health agent in Barnstable and the head of the Mass TC alternate testing center, where they're doing a lot of research into nitrogen reduction technology. So we can't spend a ton of time on it, but there's a lot of knowledge out there, and I'd be happy to send people in the right direction. So similarly with septic on town sewer, what's your grade differential? Where is that line? What is it made out of? Cast iron, PVC, and how big is it? There are certain requirements we need to meet for plumbing code. And then also it'll really come down to what are the DPW's rules? How and where can that connection happen? So that's what we like to figure out on site. And then again, punching that into your report, what are any cost implications and how is that connection going to happen?
Yeah.
So not to get too lost on septics, but here's an example of a project we were working on where we came out in the top right here and we're assessing their yard. That sort of tripod you see there is the laser transit, and that tape measure you see across the ground. We were trying to figure out, where are we putting the ADU? Where is the lot's topography here? So where might a septic go? And this is an LGen system that they designed. On the bottom here, you can see us prepping our pad for the home, and downgrade in the back, tucked in the woods line there, is that septic. So we identified this at the feasibility study level. We said, hey, the feasibility of the ADU is possible. It is feasible, but you're going to need a new septic. Let's earmark a chunk of change to know that when you're thinking holistically about the whole project, you're going to need this piece of infrastructure.
Well, you always need a separate septic.
Yeah, say that 10 times fast. The short answer is no, not always. It really does depend on what's in the ground. This is a good example. This was a home I visited in Truro. This was a new build in 2018, and they're looking to add some space for their growing family. So I went in the basement and I found their sewer pipe. I figured out how deep is it leaving the house. Where is it leaving the house? This was 4-inch PVC. So we knew we would have the green light to connect to it. And then I went out in the yard and figured out, on this case, it was very easy with that snorkel there, where the leach field was. But the tank was near the house, and we made an informed decision for them. Hey, this is the best route to connect to. So it is site by site dependent on what's there and what's the topography, to know whether we can connect to what's there or if new infrastructure is needed.
Yeah, to go a little deeper on that too, April, it depends on, the existing age of the infrastructure, what the capacity is of the septic. If, ideally, there can either be town records or the property owner has some information in regards to when and how big the septic was put in, let alone where. But given those circumstances, sometimes we can attach, and we often do attach to an existing septic system. Sometimes it is necessary to put in a new septic system. Sometimes it's preferred to put in a new septic system. Age, capacity, those are usually the big drivers, and proximity.
And here in Massachusetts, all local health agents and departments are beholden to Title V rules and requirements. So it depends on what's there. Are we looking at bedrooms? Are we looking at total number of rooms? What's there? How old is it? How big's the tank? How big's the leach field? So yeah, Jeff mentioned this is going and finding the records. So I can't remember exactly where this one was. some Brewster here. But what are the records? We can see as much as we can see on site in the basement and from the surface, but trying to figure out what's in the ground is we need to go and pull those records and analyze them. So we do that as part of the feasibility. And as you'll see in the example report coming up, we download that with our site visit to see how and where an ADU might go in that connection. So water and wells, we have the pleasure of working in some rural areas where people are on well water. So sometimes Jeff and I are out there trouncing around in your backyard or your front yard or your side yard, trying to figure out where the heck is the well. This was a photo from an adventure that I went on. I did end up finding the well, but it was not here in the backyard. It was in the front yard. But what we're looking for is, where is it? Often if you're on a well, you may have a septic system. So we got to think about how far away are those, but also where is our proposed ADU going to be? And then try to figure out any information we can about that well. Oftentimes, if you're lucky, it's written or engraved on the underside of the cap on the head of that well. So if you do take that off gently, sometimes you can get some good information. Like this one was telling us the depth, the casing, and the refill rate. So why is that helpful? We're adding new construction, new plumbing fixtures. We want to try to figure out and see if we need to add any additional pressure or filtration systems, or can we just connect to what's there and go from there.
If possible, if we're able to connect to the existing well, that's going to generally save on well drilling costs and associated. It's generally going to be a cheaper way to go to use what's already there, the current infrastructure, than putting in new. But sometimes a new is called for.
And there's some flexibility in between. I know I just worked on a project and we consulted with the well company. And we were able to add the ADU to the existing well. We just needed an extra holding tank because of their refill rate, to say, hey, we're going to have an extra, I can't remember if it was 50 gallons or whatever it was, in the main house, to know that we're going to have enough water, enough pressure to serve the ADU, which is another, I think in this case, 75 feet away. So it is site by site specific. Yeah. Public water, at a lot of towns are on public water. So what are we looking for? What is the material from the street to the house before the meter? You can often see it sticking out of your basement. And we're trying to figure out, can that service line bring enough water to the main house so that when we hook up to the ADU, we'll be okay. Similarly, it'll often reduce to the meter. So what is that meter size? You'll see 5/8 meters. Sometimes you'll see a 3/4 inch meter. But what's coming out of the ground? How big is your meter? But basically, some good general rules is, if you're bigger than 3/4 inch copper, you should be good to go. Lots of towns on the Cape are poly. If you're newer construction, it might be PEX. But there are a bunch of different materials out there and sizes. So we just want to get our eyes on that. Ultimately, your DPW, the water department, has their rules. They're going to tell us how are they dealing with ADUs. Some towns say the ADU gets its own water line and its own meter. Other towns say connect to the existing meter. Other towns say connect in front of the existing meter, but have a separate meter in the ADU. ADUs are new, relatively speaking, and we find that water departments don't have standardized rules. So you need to ask your local authorities what they want to see, because they do control that water. So we follow their rules.
Yep.
All right. The last utility here is electric. We're building all electric homes. So power is a big item. We need to figure out where is the power and how much is there. For our new homes, we're looking for 200 amps. For us, that's the gold standard. We're running heat pumps. electric hot water, electric appliances, not to mention, your lights. So we want to make sure we have enough juice for your project. So as part of that feasibility, we need to figure out what's there. How many amps is your current panel, and how are you using that? I was at a feasibility today, and they had a hot tub, they had a Tesla charger, they had heat pumps. They were maxed out. We cannot pull any more power from that panel. So as we go and approach this feasibility study, we're going to make sure that whatever avenue we propose, that they're getting, enough power to that ADU. So what we're often doing is that a second service. So the main house has its service, and we're proposing a secondary service. So we're not touching the existing house, but that's not always the case. In some instances, it might make sense to upgrade the main house, whether that's from 100 to 200 amps, from 200 to 400 amps. There is some nuance there, but ultimately, when we come and do that site visit and have our engineering team review it, we're making sure that there's going to be enough power for the new unit and that we're not going to disrupt the existing house. And don't forget a conduit for communications. You want internet. Some people still have a landline. So as we're thinking about how are we getting power out there, we're not leaving behind the utilities, whether they're at the street.
Yeah, I see a lot of variation with power, and at least in Maine, there's a lot of different. I'm going from raw land out in rural Maine to, somewhere on Peaks Island to all over the place. So this is something that we take pretty seriously, and we find out what is there and what the best path forward would be, given your particular circumstance, and it varies quite a bit.
And it's a little bit more tricky in the case that, depending on who you get your power from, it's not always easy to access the field engineer or the person who's making the call on exactly how that's going to get hooked up. So we've built enough of these now in so many municipalities, dealing with Eversource, dealing with CMP, dealing with National Grid, or there are a handful of towns, at least here in Massachusetts, that have their own power. But knowing sort of the lay of the land and what is possible. So underground power, we see that a lot, especially on Cape. So we're trying to figure out where's the meter, how big's the conduit, thinking about how big of a wire, how many amps can we run through that conduit? Where is it? Is it, the transformer is on the right here. That's a source of a lot more power, or is it a public service box? And do we need to upgrade power between a transformer and a box in a house, or just a box in a house? We're trying to get our eyes on everything that's there so we can make an informed decision on how to get power to the ADU. Overhead is the other one you're going to see. This is one I was doing in Harwich. They needed to get power from the pole to their backyard. So I got out the reel and figured out, all right, we're 125 feet, I think it was. And what's our strategy going to be? It's a little bit too far to do another overhead. So we had to look at, all right, if we're going to dig a trench and go underground, in this case, we had to contend with the driveway, with their plantings, and with the fence. But we wanted to set good expectations up front on how that was going to work. And then on the right here, this was in Acton. And in this case, where they were in their yard, we were going to do they call a mid-span connection. We were going to connect in the middle of that span that was on the street. So a couple different options there, but we're trying to wrap our heads around any obstacles and distances, because that wire, if we're proposing overhead, can't droop too low. So depending on where you are, it can go about 100 feet, sometimes 120 feet. Or do we need another pole to support that wire?
Part of the overhead connections as well is the site constraints. So since we build modular, we get the housing components, shipped in, and then we have a crane, and we have to figure out how are we, part of the feasibility study is also the logistics of how do we balance around what the current existing infrastructure is, and overhead power can often be a pretty large factor in that.
Yeah, and part of that too is price. So connecting to an existing overhead service often, not always, but often, is more cost effective versus going underground, where we need to do digging, we need to lay conduit, and there's just more labor involved. But you may have an option of what works for you. On Cape, we're seeing a lot of underground, and it makes sense to continue that underground, even though it is a little bit more expensive. If when we're getting 110, 115, 120 mile an hour winds, when your power is underground, it's a little bit less to worry about. So a lot of nuance there, but we want to get our eyes on site and then again download that to your pricing table to say, hey, to get power to your project, it's going to cost X, Y, or Z.
Before we move on from utilities, so a lot of questions are having to do with like what steps to do things in what order. And so someone wrote, I had a recent land survey done and it includes topography. There's what I believe an ideal space to build an ADU, but whether an additional subsurface waste disposal system can happen is the big question because we're maxed out on our current system. I'm thinking I need a soil scientist to say a septic system can be installed. And if the soils are conducive, then I'm thinking I could bring in backyard ADUs for feasibility. If you have a soil scientist available, I could do that sooner. And I guess the question is more of like, is that the order of operations that you would recommend?
That is a great question. And honestly, it strikes at the heart of why we're doing the feasibility study. There are so many variables here, and it's hard to figure out which step to take first. We've had a lot of people who've gone to an architect and designed a house only to realize, it was out of my budget, or in one case, it was designed and did not meet the setbacks. They designed an ADU that was outside of the setbacks, so you couldn't even build it. Those are sort of horror stories for us because we know that person spent a lot of time and a lot of money, pursuing something that ultimately, wasn't a viable project. So getting back to the core of this question, it's a great first step to get a survey. But what we're doing as part of this feasibility is a bootleg survey. We're calling it a site sketch. So instead of, paying the surveyor a chunk of change, we're downloading the known data, downloading our site visit, and trying to get you that information. So topography is good. If you have, ebbs and flows on your lot, we would try to capture that too. But how do you approach the septic? You want to think about all these other pieces too. Water, power, site access, and ultimately, what is the cost of an ADU on your project? You want to figure that piece out first, and whether that is going to be the right, are you in the right ballpark to build an ADU before you, continue to spend more time and energy, on a soil scientist, on a perk test, on a septic design. Let's make sure first, hey, this entire project is going to be viable for you and fit your needs.
I think that customer sounds like they're very knowledgeable and doing their homework, which is impressive and above what a lot of folks do. I would say that there are other answers that are questions that need to be answered before I would recommend they answer or get guidance on before they go ahead and do a septic design or a kind of perk test. Who are they building for the ADU for? Why are they building it? What's their budget? Where are they trying to do it? And those are questions that we can help walk you through. And part of our due diligence, part of what we do, either it would be after the feasibility study, but if you were to go with design with us, we would do a septic design for you. So at least in Maine, that's part of the design costs that we assume. So I would recommend reaching out to us and having a conversation, and we can help you figure out what can you even build what you're hoping to build before you go out and design a septic. I've had a few customers design septics before they talk to us, and we end up most of the time not going with that septic design because it doesn't fit with what they actually wanted to build and where they're trying to build it. And so then they have to get another septic design. So I would talk to one of us before doing the septic.
And if they're in Massachusetts, I'll speak from some of my experience. There are setbacks from those septic components for foundations. So, it's sort of the chicken or the egg. Oftentimes we want to think about buildable area and where do you want an ADU and what makes sense. And then let's think about that septic and where that might make sense to build, because we don't want to put a septic system where now we have a setback from it. And now the ADU, isn't quite in the right spot, or we now have some other constraint that we're designing around. Yeah.
And ultimately, that is the whole point of the feasibility study, where it is the $600, but it's to get a broad overview before you deep dive into all what can be much larger expenses, like you said, just to find out that it's not even possible in a broader, bigger picture. So
Definitely. And it sounds like going off the information from the question, one of the follow-ups from a feasibility might be just that, saying, hey, this is the buildable area, we're in your budget. The next step would be, let's get the surveyor lined up with the septic designer and take that next step. So
yeah,
that's good for everyone to know that too. The feasibility study also includes the next steps to follow if this is something that you're wanting to do. So it's kind of like the first step that then sends you into the next few steps if you want to follow through.
Yep. And so at each step that we're talking about here with these utilities, we're trying to capture all the knowns and guide you in the right way. But there sometimes are these other tail pieces that will say, hey, this is that nugget of information we need to finalize. Let's go do it.
Yep.
And do we ever navigate with someone who's looking to do this on a property they're considering buying but haven't bought yet?
Absolutely. I was on the phone last night for close to an hour helping some folks think about where they want to live next and what piece of land to buy. So I would recommend reaching out to me or Jeff, or we'll be happy to chat with you. But in short, you want to find where you want to live first. So make sure it's the right town, or near family, or whatever your big parameters are. And then what we do recommend is treat this feasibility like you would a home inspection if you were buying a home, but for that raw land. Let's come out and see what clearing, what site prep, what site access, and about these other utilities, perk tests, well, power, to again give you a ballpark budget for the entire build. You can then also know what is the land costs going and see if the two together make sense for your budget and for your goals.
And our other questions are more about what's included that we haven't covered yet in the feasibility. So you can go over the rest of that, pricing and stuff like that.
Great. So when Jeff and I, we do the pre-work along with our civil department, we come and do the site work, the site visit as step 2. And before we get to step 3 and get you those deliverables, it goes through our review process. So our engineering team is going to look over the entire build with their high level construction lens. Our design team looks at it as well. Say, hey, what can we build here? Does it make sense? Are we building the right house for the site and for you to fit your goals? And then together with those reviews, it's all going back to our pricing to know that we're really honed in. And we try to be within 5 or 10% on that project cost output, so that you can again make that informed decision to say, hey, this pricing works for me, this project works for me, and here are my next steps. So the last part is these deliverables, and it comes in 2 parts. The first is the sketch. So I called it a bootleg.
You're like so
survey.
excited right now. It's funny. You're like, okay.
Well, it's great. This is one we just did. Let's see if I can zoom in here. I can't. But in this case, we came to the site. We downloaded all the data that we could get, and then figured out what might work for them. So we were dealing with property setbacks. And in this case, this long rectangle in the middle of the screen was their leach field. And so setback from that could be our future buildable area. So what we settled upon is that an ADU was going to work. They'd have this buildable area sort of between the road at the top of the screen and the main house sort of in the middle, bottom right of the screen, and that we could connect to power at the street. We could connect to city water at the street, and that although the ADU would need its own septic tank in this town, we could connect in parallel here and share that leach field together. So we also downloaded where our crane could go, where a future driveway could go, and all the pertinent information for zoning, but also for that ADU and how we're going to get those utilities there. So this is the site sketch, part one. And then part two was the report. So in this case, we downloaded, I think this is like a 15-page report. So we went through their dimensional requirements, their municipal ADU requirements, all of the utility information we looked at today. We looked at crane logistics and site logistics. And then the thing everyone's looking at, that's why we put it on the third page, is because we know everyone's just going to scroll right to the budget output. But we downloaded all these different categories, everything that's going to go into a project. What are the typical costs that we see? But on your specific land, what are the costs we're anticipating? And then some comments. So in this case, we saw in this sketch, they were going to clear a new driveway. So we wanted to factor that into the total project cost. In site work, utilities in this case, for the underground power, we knew that National Grid was going to charge them for the wire, that we were going to go underground, so it was going to cost a bit more. In this case, they wanted a bigger ADU than one of our models, so we added some additional size to meet their goals. They had a little bit of extra interior and exterior work costs. And then we knew in this case in Falmouth on Cape that there was going to be some additional permitting and water department fees. So in total on their property, the ADU of their size that they wanted, we knew was going to be within 5 or 10% of 322. So along with their sketch and along with this 15-page report, they had all the information and our best bid to build their project. So she walked away. We had a Zoom meeting actually just the other day. We reviewed the whole thing together and we went over all of her requirements and what was possible. And so she had a couple questions for me about, the electrical connection and the septic connection. But she left very informed. And in her case, she had a couple follow-up questions she had with her family to see if this was going to be the right project for her. But she knows that if they decide that yes, here's exactly how that project is going to go. And hopefully, right on target with budget.
That image too is a great example of, I know a lot of people write or ask, like, I live here, what's it going to cost me to build this many square feet? And this is a good example of how it can fluctuate between that 290 and the 322 and all the variables involved too. That's, yeah, that's good.
I agree, April. And like Tim said, this is usually about page 3 of the feasibility report, and they're usually 12 to 18 pages long. So the rest of those pages are our homework, showing you why in depth, why we think the electric's going to be what it is. Every utility connection, all the homework that we data collected from this. So it might look like a bunch of numbers, but there's a lot of homework behind what we present on this snippet at the front.
And that
so I said all of this is done, that entire report and the site sketch, that's all for the $600.
Yep.
Yes.
Exactly. And it honestly, it really just covers our time. We take a lot of time and pride to go and get all this information and compile that report and then have everyone on our team look at it. So I included this image on the right too, because we do get asked all the time, what's possible on my property. And that's where, we do that pre-review, but then we do need to go on site and actually see, let's measure, what are your current setbacks? What are your current lot coverages? What are things on site? Because again, we can only do so much from the computer. But we want to get you that information to know, hey, Are there any red flags? Are there any things that might hinder this project, or what their costs might be?
This question was asked a lot earlier, but it's saying, does your feasibility study include a breakdown of pre-development costs that would have to be owner funded prior to obtaining financing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're looking at the whole project cost. So we're going to try to include all those pieces. Any septic design work up front, land clearing, all that stuff, we would try to capture in the cost on your property. You could then divide some of those out and say, all right, I'm gonna, remove my old shed, or take down these trees before you get rolling on this project. And we would also look at it with you to say, what's the scope that you want to take on versus what's the scope that we're going to take on. So when we are calculating this cost on your property, this would be Backyard ADUs doing turnkey construction, including all these pieces we just talked about. You could also do like a DIY route where we say, hey, we're going to design, permit, and deliver a house shell, whether that includes a kitchen and bathroom, or it really is sort of more just a shell. And then if you take on certain pieces of this project, we would have a DIY price for you, which would be much lower than that total turnkey price. I didn't include in our presentation tonight the DIY cost breakdown, but that is a similar table to the one on the left here, except it's far more in depth. So we break out, all the interior work, flooring, painting, drywall, etc., all the exterior work. We break down all these categories. So then you could take each individual one and say, this is something I want to do. This is something I want Backyard to do. And sort of treat the project like an a la carte menu to help you lower that overall cost, if that's something you're looking to do.
Yeah, to touch on the question and to further expand on what Tim had used as an analogy, say you wanted to build your ADU where your old shed was, or where some trees were that you needed cleared, we would have included those costs in this project cost overview, and then in the subsequent pages gone over shed removal, $1,000 or whatever we end up putting as a line item for that. If that was something that you wanted to take on before, that you wanted to do yourself or take on, then that would just be eliminated from the budget. And so if you wanted to do that before you got financing, if you wanted to work on certain aspects of what it is that our total project cost was, like those things, like certain site work items, that's definitely feasible and okay. So.
And then on the back end, if there are any items, like if you wanted to take on your own painting, we could take that out of the total project cost. And then, if you go and get financing for that total project costs, but then take on any scope after that. There is sort of a gray area there with the bank of how much you could pull out. But Jeff and I would work with you on that to get you where you want to be.
We do have another event in 2 weeks too, our Design 101 seminar, where we talk a lot about the design and the cost. And I am prefacing with that because we did get a question, so I'm telling Tim to give the shorter answer possible, or Jeff. On average, how much does it cost per square foot to build an ADU? The common square foot question. So if you want to touch on that, and then we do go over it a little more in depth in a couple of weeks too.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So you want to take that one, Jeff?
Yeah, I'll give a stab at it. Quick and dirty. Square foot price per square foot is an hard rubric to apply to ADUs, and especially the way that we build, because we do not just the total cost per square foot of what your house would be, but for the entirety of the project, which there's often a lot of nuance to everybody's property and what the scope is that we're taking on. So it's a hard rubric to then apply to ADUs, the cost per square foot. I'll also depends on what it is that your goal is with the ADU, whether it's short-term rental or multi-generational living or those kind of factors. Since we're building it so small, it does tend to look more inflated than what some single family homes could be out on the market.
Yeah, and a
Because
good
there are
example
fixed
of that is
costs to
power.
building them up. Ultimately,
Yeah.
there's the fixed costs that don't change. So like, until you hit like 8 to, I mean, I'm making up a number, but like a higher square footage, that's when you start to see the price per square foot go down, even though you're building more. Is that correct?
Yep. So like if we're bringing a 200 amp power service from the street, to the backyard, and we're building 800 square feet, the price per square foot is going to be higher than if we're building 2,000 square feet. But either way, you need to bring that, power line to the back. So same with site work, water, sewer, septic, all those pieces that are sort of fixed. And then, when we're building, for example, 800 square feet, we're going to have higher costs per square foot. But to get at the crux of that question, depending on where you are too, we're anywhere from, 350, 400, kind of depends on where you are and what's really going to be involved, in your project.
And then we also have the DIY shell option as well to.
Exactly. So that would also, invert that, where the cost per square foot is much, much lower, where you're not paying a general contractor's overhead, and you're taking on labor savings, and potentially material savings, depending on, what you're looking for your finish. So how do you get started? That was a information dump tonight, and I know we're a little bit past 6 o'clock.
We started a little late, for the record.
It's true. It's true. So thanks everyone for sticking around. But what Jeff and I love to do, is just have a chat. Again, we sort of want to know what your goals are. Can we help meet your goals? It really is helpful to have a chat. So reach out to email, our phone, social media are all great ways to reach us. But we want to hear what your goals are, and help steer you in the right direction. The other part of that is, what town are you in and what's your address? So again, we can look up the rules in your town, but also the rules in your specific zoning district. And Jeff and I are happy to go in and do that review. I was on a call with someone today, and there was the unfortunate news that their town's a bit behind the 8 ball. They can't permit this thing as an ADU, but they could build an addition. So it was helpful to have that conversation of, was an addition to your house, would that suit your goals? In their case, they're going to talk with their family and figure that out. But we had that initial contact. I did the zoning review, and then we had that chat. So it was really helpful for me to be informed about their town and their property. And then I could give them, all the information that I could, from the office here, without, imposing the cost of the feasibility and us generating that report. So they have the information they need to make the right choice for their family. But this is how to get started. You can reach out to Jeff, to his email there, jeff.bowman@backyardadus.com, or myself, tim.o'reilly@backyardadus.com. But we're sort of your lifeline here to help you figure out and navigate, all these pieces. And hopefully you end up like these folks, up in, where were they, Jeff?
They were in Elliott.
They were in Elliott, Maine, where we designed their house, permitted their house, and built their house, and they've retired happily to their, to the backyard.
Yeah, we exchange Christmas cards, me and those folks there.
Oh yeah, they are so nice.
They're so nice. I love them.
And unfortunately, we don't have enough time. We were going to do a live report, take someone from this evening and go through that process, hear about what their goals are, go look, at their town rules, go look at their town GIS, look at their property, and try to get all that intel up front before we would go and do a site visit. But we don't have enough time. There is a financing appendix here. I wanted to show this slide because I know it will be recorded. So if you are in Massachusetts, this is Massachusetts specific. take a look at the home modification loan program that might help you get into an ADU. And then Cape specific, the Housing Assistance Corporation. I think their funds have sort of been used, but there are some local banks that have ADU specific financing pieces. But that's me.
And I'll include those too in the email tomorrow for all of you who didn't get it
Do you
fast.
have any final questions here?
Yeah, we just had one. I'm thinking that I may need to remove an existing detached 2-car garage. I'm wondering, one, are your ADUs on slabs or foundations, and is that as part of the feasibility study? And well, we'll answer that part first, I guess.
Yes. We want to get our eyes on that garage if we know we need to remove it, and then we'd want to ballpark the demolition cost. And then our typical foundation is a shallow frost protected foundation, which is an 18-inch crawl space. So it's fully insulated, it's fully accessed, so you can repair any plumbing or utility or HVAC concerns down the road, but it's all watertight and sealed up.
Because they said the current garage is not conforming as the house was built pre-code. Anything that they should consider there?
Yeah, so we would want to look at that from the zoning perspective. Where is that on your lot? Like they brought up it being non-conforming. Are there any zoning aspects of that? When we put on our construction and building hat, how was it built? What is the foundation? Can anything be salvaged? Or does it make sense to start new? Sometimes you can put an ADU above an existing garage, but there is some nuance there. So we want to get our eyes on site, and then help you, estimate those costs and impacts.
Mm-hmm. Certain municipalities are going to allow building within an existing non-conforming structures footprint. Some have verbiage on that, some don't. Some have. It depends. So go ahead and email Tim or myself, and we can help you figure out what's possible.
We reached the end of the questions. We did it.
All right.
Way to go.
So I do want to remind everyone that, like I said, in 2 weeks, we have our Design 101, choosing the right design path for you. So we'll go over all of our different designs. If you are just interested in hearing more, because we do go, even if you have not done a feasibility study, we answer a lot more questions too, regarding pricing and funding and design choices and things to consider, which may even impact whether or not you decide to build or not. And Tim and Jeff will both be there. Tomorrow I'll be sending out that follow-up email. It will have Tim and Jeff's contact info, and it will have a lot of the things that they referenced, including that last slide that Tim showed. And I'll make sure to include some main links as well. And if you think of anything, feel free to email me if it's a resource, or reach out to Tim and Jeff, as they can answer way more questions than I can regarding the specifics. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Any last words, you two?
I guess the last thing I was just going to add is our pricing guide was just updated at the end of February here. So reach out to Jeff or I, and we'd be happy to share that with you. That again is getting you good information up front. It's not a substitute for a feasibility, but it's sort of ballpark estimates of where our models are at right now. And then with placeholders for those things we looked at tonight for utilities, site work, all that stuff, to help you think about what might be possible.
One thing that we didn't mention or talk about much too is the feasibility study is something that you can use with any builder, or if you decide you want to build a home yourself, like we'll provide all that information, and it's in no way do you have to choose us as a builder. It's just to get you that information no matter what path you decide to pick. Jeff,
Non-binding.
Non-binding.
Non-binding. Yeah, we're always we are, at least I know Tim's doing feasibility studies left and right, and we're adding more and more capacity to be able to do them. But I know that I am booked out up here in Maine into the first week of May as it is right now. So if you are interested in this, definitely reach out to us. We are still scheduling for building later this year. We do that on a rolling basis, so that's the window is closing if you wanted to build this year, but it's not completely closed. So go ahead and reach out to us, and we'd love to help you with your project.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why we do the feasibility, just trying to get you good information, because there's a lot out there. So we'll give you our best crack at it.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you in a couple weeks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.